Dead Men Tell No Tales, by Eva Hornung, Part 3, Chapter 11. I Live Again. Squire Rattray, as I say, was seated at the head of his table, where the broken meats still lay as he and I had left them. His fingers, I remember, were playing with a crust, and his eyes fixed upon a distant door as he leant back in his chair. Behind him hovered the nigger of the Lady Jermyn, whom I had been the slower to recognize. Had not her skipper sat facing me on the squire's right? Yes, there was Captain Harris in the flesh, eating heartily between great gulps of wine, instead of feeding the fishes as all the world supposed. And nearer still, nearer me than any, with his back to my window but his chair slewed round a little, so that he also could see that door, and I his profile, sat Joaquin Santos with his cigarette. None spoke, all seemed waiting, and all were silent but the captain, whose vulgar champing reached me through the crazy lattice, as I stood spellbound and petrified without. They say that a drowning man lives his life again before the last, but my own fight with the sea provided me with no such moments of vivid and rapid retrospect as those during which I stood breathless outside the lighted windows of Kirby Hall. I landed again. I was dogged day and night. I set it down to nerves and notoriety, but took refuge in a private hotel. One followed me, engaged the next room, set a watch on all my movements. Another came in by the window to murder me in my bed. No party to that. The first one, nevertheless, turned the outrage to account, wormed himself into my friendship on the strength of it, and lured me hither, an easy prey. And here was the gang of them, to meet me. No wonder Rattray had let me see him off at the station. No wonder I had not been followed that night. Every link I saw in its right light instantly. Only the motive remained obscure. Suspicious circumstances swarmed upon my slow perception. How innocent I had been. Less innocent, however, than wilfully and wholly reckless. What had it mattered with whom I made friends? What had anything mattered to me? What did anything matter? I thought my heart had snapped. Why were they watching that door, Joaquin Santos and the young squire? Whom did they away to? Oh, I knew. My heart leaped, my blood danced. My eyes lay in wait with theirs. Everything began to matter once more. It was as though the machinery of my soul, long stopped, had suddenly been set in motion. It was as though I was born again. How long we seemed to wait I need not say. It cannot have been many moments in reality, for Santos was blowing his rings of smoke in the direction of the door, and the first that I noticed were but dissolving when it opened. And the best was true. One instant I saw her very clearly, in the light of a candle which she carried in its silver stick. Then a mist blinded me, and I fell on my knees in the rank bed into which I had stepped, to give such thanks to the Almighty as this heart has never felt before since. And I remained kneeling, for now my face was on a level with the sill, and when my eyes could see again, there stood my darling before them in the room. Like a queen she stood, in the very travelling cloak in which I had seen her last. It was tattered now, but she held it close about her as though a shrewd wind bit her to the core. Her sweet face was all peaked and pale in the candle light. She who had been a child was come to womanhood in a few weeks. But a new spirit flashed in her dear eyes, a new strength hardened her young lips. She stood as an angel brought to book by devils, and so noble was her calm defiance, so serene her scorn, that as I watched and listened, all present fear for her passed out of my heart. The first sound was the hasty rising of young Rattray. He was at Eva's side next instant, essaying to lead her to his chair, with a flush which deepened as she repulsed him coldly. "You have sent for me, and I have come," said she. "But I prefer not to sit down in your presence, and what you have to say, you will be good enough to say as quickly as possible. That I may go again before I am—" Stifled. It was her one hot word, aimed at them all. It seemed to me to fall like a lash on Rattray's cheek, bringing the blood to it like lightning. But it was Santos who snatched the cigarette from his mouth, and opened upon the defenceless girl in a torrent of Portuguese, yellow with rage, and a very windmill of lean arms and brown hands in the terrifying rapidity of his gesticulations. They did not terrify Eva Denison. When Rattray took a step towards the speaker, with flashing eyes, it was some word from Eva that checked him. When Santos was done, it was to Rattray that she turned with her answer. "He calls me a liar for telling you that Mr. Cole knew all," said she, thrilling me with my own name. "Don't you say anything," she added, as the young man turned on Santos with a scowl. "You are one as wicked as the other, but there was a time when I thought differently of you, his character. I have always known. Of the two evils I prefer to speak to you." Rattray bowed, humbly enough, I thought, but my darling's nostrils only curled the more. "He calls me a liar," she continued, "so may you all, since you have found it out. I admit it freely and without shame. One must be false in the hands of false fiends like all of you. Weakness is nothing to you, helplessness is nothing. You must be met with your own weapons. And so I lied in my sore extremity to gain the one miserable advantage within my reach. He says you found me out by making friends with Mr. Cole. He says that Mr. Cole has been dining with you in this very room, this very night. You still tell the truth sometimes, has that man, that demon. Told it for once." "It is perfectly true," said Rattray in a low voice. "And poor Miss Cole told you that he knew nothing of your villainy. I found out that he knew absolutely nothing, after first thinking otherwise. Suppose he had known, what would you have done?" Rattray said nothing. Santos shrugged as he lit a fresh cigarette. The captain went on with his supper. "Ashamed to say?" cried Eva Denison. "So you have some shame left still? Well, I will tell you. You would have murdered him, as you murdered all the rest. You would have killed him in cold blood, as I wish and pray that you would kill me." The young fellow faced her, white to the lips. "You have no right to say that, Miss Denison," he cried. "I may be bad, but as I am ready to answer for my sins, the crime of murder is not among them. Well, it is still some satisfaction to remember that my love never punished me with such a look as was the young squire's reward for this protestation. The curl of the pink nostrils, the parting of the proud lips, the gleam of the sound white teeth, before a word was spoken, were more than I, for one, could have borne. For I did not see the grief underlying the scorn, but actually found it in my heart to pity this poor divil of a Rattray, so humbly fell those fine eyes of his, so like a dog did he stand, waiting to be whipped. "Wes, you are very innocent," she began at last, so softly that I could scarcely hear. "You have not committed murder, so you say, let it stand to your credit by all means. You have no blood upon your hands, you say so. That is enough." "No, you are comparatively innocent, I admit. All you have done is to make murder easy for others, to get others to do the dirty work, and then shelter them and share the gain. All you need have on your conscience is every life that was lost with the Lady Jermyn, and every soul that lost itself in losing them. You call that innocence. Then give me honest guilt. Give me the man who set fire to the ship, and who sits there eating his supper. He is more of a man than you. Give me the wretch who has beaten men to death before my eyes. There's something great about a monster like that. There's something to loathe. His assistant is only little, mean, despicable, loud and hurried in its wrath, low and deliberate in its contempt. All this was uttered with a furious and abnormal eloquence, which would have struck me, loving her, to the ground. On Rattray it had a different effect. His head lifted as she heaped abuse upon it, until he met her flashing eye with that of a man very thankful to take his deserts and something more, and to mine he was least despicable when that last word left her lips. When he saw that it was her last, he took her candle, she had put it down on the ancient settle against the door, and presented it to her with another bow. And so without a word he led her to the door, opened it, and bowed yet lower as she swept out, but still without a tinge of mockery in the obeisance. He was closing the door after her when Joaquin Santos reached it. "Diablo," cried he. "Well, let her go. We have not done with her. That doesn't matter. She is done with us, was the stern reply. It does matter, retorted Santos. What is more, she is my stepdaughter, and back she shall come. She is also my visitor, and I'm damned if you're going to make her. An instant Santos stood, his back to me, his fingers working, his neck brown with blood. Then his coat went into creases across the shoulders, and he was shrugging still as he turned away. Your visitor, said he. Your visitor, your visitor. Harris laughed outright as he raised his glass. The hot young squire had him by the collar, and the wine was spilling on the cloth as I rose very cautiously and crept back to the path. When rogues fall out, I was thinking to myself, I shall save her yet, shall save my darling. Already I was accustomed to the thought that she still lived, and to the big heart she had set beating in my feeble frame. Already the continued existence of these villains, with the first dim inkling of their villainy, was ceasing to be a novelty in a brain now quickened and prehensile beyond belief. And yet, but a few minutes had I knelt at the window, but a few more was it since Rattray and I had shaken hands. Not his visitor, his prisoner, without a doubt, but alive, and neither guest nor prisoner for many hours more. Oh, my love! Oh, my heart's delight! Now I knew why I was spared, to save her, to snatch her from these rascals, to cherish and protect her evermore. All the past shone clear behind me, the dark was lightness, and the crooked straight. All the future lay clear ahead, it presented no difficulties yet. A mad, ecstatic confidence was mine for the wildest, happiest moments of my life. I stood upright in the darkness. I saw her light. It was ascending the tower at the building's end. Now in this window it glimmered, now in the one above. At last it was steady, high up near the stars, and I stole below. Eva! There was no answer. Low as it was, my voice was alarming. It cooled and cautioned me. I sought little stones. I crept back to throw them. Ah, God! Her form eclipsed that lighted slit in the grey stone tower. I heard her weeping high above me at her window. Wah! Eva! There was a pause, and then a little cry of gladness. Is it Mrs. Cole? Came in an eager whisper through her tears. Yes, yes! I was outside the window. I heard everything. They will hear you, she cried softly in a steadier voice. No, listen. They were quarrelling. Rattray's voice was loud and angry. They cannot hear, I continued in more cautious tones. They think I'm in bed and asleep half a mile away. Oh, thank God. I'll get you away from them, trust me, my love, my darling. In my madness I knew not what I said. It was my wild heart speaking. Some moments passed before she replied. Will you promise to do nothing I ask you not to do? Of course. My life might answer for it. I promise? I promise. Then wait. Watch my light. When you see it back in the window, watch with all your eyes. I am going to write, and then throw it out. Not another syllable. She was gone. There was a long yellow slit in the masonry once more. Her light burnt faint and far within. I retreated among some bushes and kept watch. The moon was skimming beneath the surface of a sea of clouds. Now the black billows had silver crests. Now an incandescent buoy bobbed among them. "All for enough light, and no more!" In the hall the high voices were more subdued. I heard the captain's tipsy laugh. My eyes fastened themselves upon that faint and lofty light, and on my heels I crouched among the bushes. The flame moved, flickered, and shone small but brilliant on the very sill. I ran forward on tiptoe. A white flake fluttered to my feet. I secured it and waited for one word. None came, but the window was softly shut. I stood in doubt, the treacherous moonlight all over me now, and once more the window opened. Go quickly. And again it was shut. Next moment I was stealing close by the spot where I had knelt. I saw within once more. Harris nodded in his chair. The nigger had disappeared. Rattray was lighting a candle, and the Portuguese holding out his hand for the match. "Did you lock the gate, Senhor?" asked Santos. "No." "But I will now." As I opened it, I heard a door open within. I could hardly let the latch down again for the sudden trembling of my fingers. The key turned behind me ere I had 20 yards start. Thank God there was light enough now. I followed the beck. I found my way. I stood in the open valley, between the oak plantation and my desolate cottage, and I kissed my tiny, twisted note again and again in a paroxysm of passion and of insensate joy. Then I unfolded it and held it to my eyes in the keen October moonshine. Chapter 12. My lady's bidding. Scribbled in sore haste, by a very tremulous little hand, with a pencil on the fly-leaf of some book. My darling's message is still difficult to read. It was doubly so in the moonlight, 45 autumns ago. My eyesight, however, was then perhaps the soundest thing about me, and in little I had deciphered enough to guess correctly Zeph, as it proverb at the Hornung. You say you heard everything just now, and there is no time for further explanations. I am in the hands of villains, but not ill-treated, though they are one as bad as the other. You will not find it easy to rescue me. I don't see how it is to be done. You have promised not to do anything I ask you not to do, and I implore you not to tell a soul until you have seen me again and heard more. You might just as well kill me as come back now with help. You see you know nothing, though I told them you knew all, and so you shall as soon as I can see you for 5 minutes face to face. In the meantime do nothing. Know nothing when you see Mr. Rattray, unless you wish to be my death. It would have been possible last night, and it may be again tomorrow night. They all go out every night when they can, except Josie, who is left in charge. They are out from 9 or 10 till 2 or 3. If they are out tomorrow night, my candle will be close to the window, as I shall put it when I have finished this. You can see my window from over the wall. If the light is in front, you must climb the wall, for they will leave the gate locked. I shall see you and will bribe Josie to let me out for a turn. He has done it before for a bottle of wine. I can manage him. Can I trust to you, if you break your promise? But you will not. One of them would as soon kill me as smoke a cigarette, and the rest are under his thumb. I dare not write more, but my life is in your hands. Eva Denison. Oh? Oh, beware of the woman Braithwaite. She is about the worst of the gang. I could have burst out crying in my bitter discomfiture, mortification, and alarm to think that her life was in my hands, and that it depended, not on that prompt action, which was the one course I had contemplated, but on 24 hours of resolute inactivity. I would not think it. I refused the condition. It took away my one prop, my one stay, that prospect of immediate measures which alone preserved in me such coolness as I had retained until now. I was cool no longer. Where I had relied on practical direction, I was baffled and hindered and driven mad. On my honour, believe I was little less for some moments, groaning, cursing, and beating the air with impotent fists. In one of them my poor love's letter crushed already to a ball. Danger and difficulty I had been prepared to face, but the task that I was set was 100-fold harder than any that had whirled through my teeming brain. To sit still, to do nothing, to pretend I knew nothing. An hour of it would destroy my reason, and I was invited to wait 24. No, my word was passed. Keep it I must. She knew the men, she must know best, and her life depended on my obedience. She made that so plain. Obey I must and would. To make a start, I tottered over the plank that spanned the beck, and soon I saw the cottage against the moonlit sky. I came up to it. I drew back in sudden fear. It was a light upstairs and down, and the gaunt, strong figure of the woman Braithwaite stood out as I had seen it first, in the doorway, with the light showing warmly through her rank red hair. "Is that you, Mr. Cole?" she cried in a tone that she reserved for me, yet through the forced amiability there rang a note of genuine surprise. She had been prepared for me never to return at all. My knees gave under me as I forced myself to advance, but my wits took new life from the crisis, and in a flash I saw how to turn my weakness into account. I made a false step on my way to the door. When I reached it, I leant heavily against the jamb, and I said with a slur that I felt unwell. I had certainly been flushed with wine when I left Rattray. It would be no bad thing for him to hear that I had arrived quite tipsy at the cottage. Should he discover I had been near an hour on the way, here was my explanation cut and dried. So I shammed a degree of intoxication with apparent success, and Jane Braithwaite gave me her arm up the stairs. My God, how strong it was, and how weak was mine! Left to myself, I reeled about my bedroom, pretending to undress, then out with my candles, and into bed in all my clothes, until the cottage should be quiet. Yes, I must lie still and feign sleep, with every nerve and fibre leaping within me, lest the she-devil below should suspect me of suspicions. It was with her I had to cope for the next 24 hours, and she filled me with a greater present terror than all those villains at the Hall. For had not their poor, little helpless captive described her as about the worst of the gang? To think that my love lay helpless there in the hands of those wretches, and to think that her lover lay helpless here, in the supervision of this vile virago. It must have been 1 or 2 in the morning, when I stole to my sitting-room window, opened it, and sat down to think steadily, with the counterpane about my shoulders. The moon sailed high and almost full above the clouds. These were dispersing as the night wore on, and such as remained were of a beautiful soft tint between white and grey. The sky was too light for stars, and beneath it the open country stretched so clear and far that it was as though one looked out at noonday through slate-coloured glass. Down the dewy slope below my window a few calves fed with toothless mouthings. The beck was very audible, the oak trees less so, but for these peaceful sounds the stillness and the solitude were equally intense. I may have sat there like a mouse for half an hour. The reason was that I had become mercifully engrossed in one of the subsidiary problems, whether it would be better to drop from the window or to trust to the creaking stairs. Would the creaking be much worse than the thud, and the difference worth the risk of a sprained ankle? Well, worth it, I at length decided. The risk was nothing. My window was scarce a dozen feet from the ground. How easily it could be done, how quickly, how safely in this deep stillness and bright moonlight. I would fall so lightly on my stocking soles. A single soft, dull thud, then away under the moon without fear or risk of a false step, away over the stone walls to the main road, and so to the nearest police station with my tale. And before sunrise the villains would be taken in their beds, and my darling would be safe. I sprang up softly. Why not do it now? Was I bound to keep my rash, blind promise? Was it possible these murderers would murder her? I struck a match on my trousers, I lit a candle, I read her letter carefully again, and again it maddened and distracted me. I struck my hands together. I paced the room wildly. Caution deserted me, and I made noise enough to wake the very mute, lost to every consideration but that of the terrifying day before me, the day of silence and of inactivity, that I must live through with an unsuspecting face, a cool head, a civil tongue. The prospect appalled me as nothing else could or did. Nay, the sudden noise upon the stairs, the knock at my door, and the sense that I had betrayed myself already, even now all was over. These came as a relief after the haunting terror which they interrupted. I flung the door open, and there stood Mrs. Braithwaite, as fully dressed as myself. "You not be very well, sir." "No, I'm not." "What's t' matter wi' you?" This second question was rude and fierce with suspicion. The real woman rang out in it, yet its effect on me was astonishing. Once again was I inspired to turn my slip into a move. "Matter?" I cried. "Can't you see what's the matter? Couldn't you see when I came in? Drink's the matter. I came in drunk, and now I'm mad. I can't stand it. I'm not in a fit state. Do you know nothing of me? Have they told you nothing? I'm the only man that was saved from the Lady Jermyn, the ship that was burned to the water's edge, with every soul but me. My nerves are in little ends. I came down here for peace and quiet and sleep. Do you know that I have hardly slept for 2 months, and now I shall never sleep again. Oh, my God, I shall die for want of it. The wine has done it. I never should have touched a drop. I can't stand it. I can't sleep after it. I shall kill myself if I get no sleep. Do you hear, you woman? I shall kill myself in your house if I don't get to sleep." I saw her shrink, virago as she was. I waved my arms, I shrieked in her face. It was not all acting. Heaven knows how true it was about the sleep. I was slowly dying of insomnia. I was a nervous wreck. She must have heard it. Now she saw it for herself. No, it was by no means all acting. Intending only to lie, I found myself telling little but the strictest truth, and longing for sleep as passionately as though I had nothing to keep me awake. And yet, while my heart cried aloud in spite of me, and my nerves relieved themselves in this unpremeditated ebullition, I was all the time watching its effect as closely as though no word of it had been sincere. "Mrs." Braithwaite seemed frightened, not at all pitiful, and as I calmed down she recovered her courage and became insolent. I had spoilt her night. She had not been told she was to take in a raving lunatic. She would speak to Squire Rattray in the morning. I yelled after her as she went. "Send your husband to the nearest chemist as soon as it's dawn. Send him for currel, chloroform, morphia, anything they've got, and as much of it as they'll let him have. I'll give you £5 if you get me what else send me to sleep all tomorrow." And tomorrow night, never, I feel sure, were truth and falsehood more craftily interwoven. Yet I had thought of none of it until the woman was at my door, while of much I had not thought at all. It had rushed from my heart and from my lips, and no sooner was I alone than I burst into hysterical tears, only to stop and compliment myself because they sounded genuine, as though they were not. Towards morning I took to my bed in a burning fever, and lay there, now congratulating myself upon it, because when night came they would all think me so secure, and now weeping, because the night might find me dying or dead. So I tossed, with her note clasped in my hand underneath the sheets, and beneath my very body that stout weapon that I had bought in town. I might not have to use it, but I was fatalist enough to fancy that I should. In the meantime it helped me to lie still, my thoughts fixed on the night, and the day made easy for me after all, if only I could sleep. About 9 o'clock Jane Braithwaite paid me a surly visit. In half an hour she was back with tea and toast and an altered mind. She not only lit my fire, but treated me the while to her original tone of almost fervent civility and respect and determination. Her vagaries soon ceased to puzzle me. The psychology of Jane Braithwaite was not recondite. In the night it had dawned upon her that Rattray had found me harmless and was done with me. Therefore there was no need for her to put herself out any further on my account. In the morning, finding me really ill, she had gone to the hall in alarm. Her subsequent attentions were an act of obedience, and in their midst came Rattray himself to my bedside. Chapter 13. The longest day of my life. The boy looked so blithe and buoyant, so gallant, and still so frank, that even now I could not think as meanly of him as poor Eva did. A rogue he must be, but surely not the petty rogue that she had made him out. Yet it was dirty work that he had done by me, and there I had to lie and take his kind, false, Filon's hand in mine. "My poor dear fellow," he cried, "I'm most sorry to find you like this. But I was afraid of it last night. It's all this infernally strong air. How I longed to tell him what it was, and to see his face. The thought of Eva alone restrained me, and I retorted as before, in a tone I strove to make as friendly, that it was his admirable wine and nothing else. But you took hardly any. I shouldn't have touched a drop. I can't stand it. Instead of soothing me, it excites me to the verge of madness. I'm almost over the verge, for want of sleep. My trouble ever since the trouble. Again I was speaking the literal truth, and again congratulating myself as though it were a lie. The fellow looked so distressed at my state. Indeed, I believe that his distress was as genuine as mine, and his sentiments as involved. He took my hand again, and his brow wrinkled at its heat. He asked for the other hand to feel my pulse. I had to drop my letter to Complay. "I wish to goodness there was something I could do for you," he said. "Would you?" Would you care to see a doctor? I shook my head, and could have smiled at his visible relief. Then, I'm going to prescribe for you, he said with decision. It's the place that doesn't agree with you, and it was I who brought you to the place, therefore it's for me to get you out of it as quick as possible. Up you get, and I'll drive you to the station myself. I had another work to keep from smiling. He was so ingenuously disingenuous. There was less to smile at in his really nervous anxiety to get me away. I lay there reading him like a bookrick. It was not my health that concerned him, of course it was my safety. I told him he little knew how ill I was, an inglorious speech that came hard, though not by any means untrue. Move me with this fever on me, said I. It would be as much as my miserable life is worth. I'm afraid, said he, that it may be as much as your life's worth to stay on here. And there was such real fear in his voice and eyes that it reconciled me there and then to the discomfort of a big revolver between the mattress and the small of my back. We must get you out of it, he continued, the moment you feel fit to stir. Shall we say tomorrow? If you like, I said advisedly, and if I can get some sleep today. Then tomorrow it is. You see, I know it's the climate, he added, jumping from tone to tone. It couldn't have been those 2 or 3 glasses of sound wine. Shall I tell you what it is? I said, looking him full in the face, with eyes that I dare say were wild enough with fever and insomnia. It's the burning of the Lady Jermyn, I cried. It's the faces and the shrieks of the women. It's the cursing and the fighting of the men. It's boat-loads struggling in oily sea. It's husbands and wives jumping overboard together. It's men turned into devils. It's hell-fire afloat. Stop, stop. He whispered, hoarse as a crow. I was sitting up with my hot eyes upon him. He was white as the quilt, and the bed shook with his trembling. I had gone as far as was prudent, and I lay back with a glow of secret satisfaction. Yes, I will stop, said I, and I wouldn't have begun if you hadn't found it so difficult to understand my trouble. Now you know what it is. It's the old trouble. I came up here to forget it. Instead of that, I drink too much and tell you all about it. And the 2 things together have bowled me over, but I'll go tomorrow. Only give me something to put me asleep till then. I will, he vowed. I'll go myself to the nearest chemist, and he shall give me the very strongest stuff he's got. Goodbye, and don't you stir till I come back. For your own sake. I'll go this minute, and I'll ride like hell. And if ever 2 men were glad to be rid of each other, they were this young villain and myself. But what was his villainy? It was little enough that I had overheard at the window, and still less that poor Eva had told me in her hurried lines. All I saw clearly was that the Lady Jermyn and some 100 souls had perished by the foulest of foul play, that, besides Eva and myself. Only the incendiaries had escaped, that somehow these wretches had made a second escape from the gig, leaving dead men and word of their own death behind them in the boat. And here the motive was as much a mystery to me as the means, but in my present state both were also matters of supreme indifference. My one desire was to rescue my love from her loathsome captors. Of little else did I pause to think. Yet Rattray's visit left its own mark on my mind, and long after he was gone I lay puzzling over the connection between a young Lancastrian, of good name, of ancient property, of great personal charm, and a crime of unparalleled atrocity committed in cold blood on the high seas. That his complicity was flagrant I had no room to doubt, after Eva's own indictment of him, uttered to his face and in my hearing. Was it then the usual fraud on the underwriters, and was Rattray the inevitable accomplice on dry land? I could think of none but the conventional motive for destroying a vessel. Yet I knew there must be another and a subtler one, to account not only for the magnitude of the crime, but for the pains which the actual perpetrators had taken to conceal the fact of their survival, and for the union of so diverse a trinity as Senhor Santos, Captain Harris, and the young squire. It must have been about midday when Rattray reappeared, ruddy spurred, and splashed with mud, a comfort to sick eyes, I declare, in spite of all. He brought me 2 little vials, put one on the chimney-piece, poured the other into my tumbler, and added a little water. "Thea, old fellow," said he, "swallow that, and if you don't get some sleep, the chemist who made it up is the greatest liar unhung." "What is it?" I asked, the glass in my hand and my eyes on those of my companion. "I don't know," said he. "I just told them to make up the strongest sleeping draught that was safe, and I mentioned something about your case. Toss it off, man. It's sure to be all right." Yes, I could trust him. He was not that sort of villain, for all that Eva Denison had said. I liked his face as well as ever. I liked his eye, and could have sworn to its honesty as I drained the glass. Even had it been otherwise, I must have taken my chance or shown him all, as it was, when he had pulled down my blind and shaken my pillow, and he gave me his hand once more. I took it with involuntary cordiality. I only grieved that so fine a young fellow should have involved himself in so villainous a business, yet for Eva's sake I was glad that he had, for my mind failed, rather than refused, to believe him so black as she had painted him. The long, long afternoon that followed I never shall forget. The opiate racked my head. It did not do its work, and I longed to sleep till evening with a longing I've never known before or since. Everything seemed to depend upon it. I should be a man again, if only I could first be a log for a few hours. But no. My troubles never left me for an instant, and there I must lie, pretending that they had. For the other draught was for the night, and if they but thought the first one had taken due effect, so much the less would they trouble their heads about me, when they believed that I had swallowed the second. Oh, but it was cruel! I lay and wept with weakness and want of sleep. A night fell I knew that it would find me useless, if indeed my reason lingered on. To lie there helpless when Eva was expecting me. That would be the finishing touch. I should rise a maniac if ever I rose at all. More probably I would put one of my 5 big bullets into my own splitting head. It was no small temptation, lying there in a double agony, with the loaded weapon by my side. Then sometimes I thought it was coming, and perhaps for an instant would be tossing in my hen coop, then back once more. And I swear that my physical and mental torments, here in my bed, would have been incomparably greater than anything I had endured on the sea, but for the saving grace of one sweet thought. She lived. She lived. And the God who had taken care of me, a castaway, would surely deliver her also from the hands of murderers and thieves. But not through me. I lay weak and helpless, and my tears ran again and yet again as I felt myself growing hourly weaker. I remember what a bright fine day it was, with the grand open country all smiles beneath a clear, almost frosty sky, once when I got up on tiptoe and peeped out. A keen wind whistled about the cottage. I felt it on my feet as I stood, but never have I known a more perfect and invigorating autumn day. And there I must lie with the manhood ebbing out of me, the manhood that I needed so for the night. I crept back into bed. I swore that I would sleep. Yet there I lay, listening sometimes to that vile woman's tread below, sometimes to mysterious whispers, between whom I neither knew nor cared, and unto my watch ticking by my side, to the heart beating in my body hour after hour, hour after hour. I prayed as I have seldom prayed. I wept as I have never wept. I railed and blasphemed, not with my lips, because the woman must think I was asleep, but so much the more viciously in my heart. Suddenly it turned dark. There were no gradations, not even a tropical twilight. 1 minute the sun upon the blind, the next. Thank God! Oh, thank God! No light broke any longer through the blind. Just a faint and narrow glimmer stole between it and the casement, and the light that had been bright golden was pale as silver now. It was the moon. I had been in dreamless sleep for hours. The joy of that discovery! The transport of waking to it, and waking refreshed. The swift and sudden miracle that it seemed. I shall never, never forget it, still less the sickening thrill of fear which was cruelly quick to follow upon my joy. The cottage was still as the tomb. What if I had slept too long? With trembling hand I found my watch. Luckily I had wound it in the early morning. I now carried it to the window, drew back the blind, and held it in the moonlight. It was not quite 10 o'clock, and yet the cottage was so still, so still. I stole to the door, opened it by cautious degrees, and saw the reflection of a light below. Still not a sound could I hear, save the rapid drawing of my own breath, and the startled beating of my own heart. I now felt certain that the Braithwaites were out, and dressed hastily, making as little noise as possible, and still hearing absolutely none from below. Then, feeling faint with hunger, though a new being after my sleep, I remembered a packet of sandwiches which I had not opened on my journey north. These I transferred from my travelling bag, where they had lain forgotten, to my jacket pocket, before drawing down the blind, leaving the room on tiptoe, and very gently fastening the door behind me. On the stairs, too, I trod with the utmost caution, feeling the wall with my left hand, ere my right was full, lest by any chance I might be mistaken in supposing I had the cottage to myself. In spite of my caution there came a creak at every step, and to my sudden horror I heard a chair move in the kitchen below. My heart and I stood still together, but my right hand tightened on stout wood, my right forefinger trembled against thin steel. The sound was not repeated, and at length I continued on my way down, my teeth set, an excuse on my lips, but determination in every fibre of my frame. A shadow lay across the kitchen floor. It was that of the deaf-mute, as he stood on a chair before the fire, supporting himself on the chimney-piece with one puny arm, while he reached overhead with the other. I stood by for an instant, glorying in the thought that he could not hear me. The next, I saw what it was he was reaching up for, a bell-mouthed blunderbuss, and I knew the little devil for the impostor that he was. "You touch it," said I, "and you will drop dead on that hearth." He pretended not to hear me, but he heard the click of the splendid spring which Messrs. Dean and Adams had put into that early revolver of theirs, and he could not have come down much quicker with my bullet in his spine. "Now then," I said, "what the devil do you mean by shamming deaf and dumb?" "I never said I was auto tissot." He whimpered, cowering behind the chair in a sullen ague. "But you acted it, and I've a jolly good mind to shoot you dead. So remember, I was so weak myself that I thought my arm would break from presenting my 5 chambers and my 10-inch barrel, otherwise I should be sorry to relate how I bud that mouse of a man. I may let you off," I continued, "if you answer questions. Where's your wife?" "She way, I'll be back directly," said Braithwaite, with some tact, but his look was too cunning to give the warning weight. "I've a bullet to spare for her," said I, cheerfully. "Now then, where is she?" "Gone wi' the others, for aught I know." "And where are the others gone?" "Where they allus go." "Over to the sea?" "Over to the sea, eh? We getting on? What takes them there?" "That's more than I can tell you, sir," said Braithwaite, with so much emphasis and so little reluctance as to convince me that, for once at least, he had spoken the truth. There was even a spice of malice in his tone. I began to see possibilities in the little beast. "Well," I said, "you are a nice lot. I don't know what your game is, and don't want to. I've had enough of you without that. I'm off tonight, before they get back." Asked Braithwaite, plainly in doubt about his duty, and yet as plainly relieved to learn the extent of my intention. "Certainly," said I. "Why not? I'm not particularly anxious to see your wife again, and you may ask Miss Rattray from me why the devil he led me to suppose you were deaf and dumb. Or, if you like, you needn't say anything at all about it," I added, seeing his thin jaw fall. "Tell him I never found you out, but just felt well enough to go and went. When do you expect them back?" "It won't be yet a bit," said he. "Now look here. What would you say to these?" And I showed him a couple of sovereigns. I longed to offer him 20, but feared to excite his suspicions. "These are yours if you have a conveyance at the end of the lane. The lane we came up the night before last, in an hour's time. His dull eyes glistened, but a trimmer took him from top to toe, and he shook his head. "I'm ill, man," I cried. "If I stay here, I'll die. Mr. Rattray knows that, and he wanted me to go this morning. He'll be only too thankful to find me gone." This argument appealed to him. Indeed, I was proud of it. "But I was to stop and look after you," he mumbled. "It'll get me into trouble, it will that." I took out 3 more sovereigns. Not a penny higher durst I go. "Will £5 repay you?" "No need to tell your wife it was 5, you know. I should keep 4 of them all to myself." The cupidity of the little wretch was at last overcoming his abject cowardice. I could see him making up his miserable mind. And I still flatter myself that I took only safe and really cunning steps to precipitate the process. To offer him more money would have been madness. Instead, I poured it all back into my pocket. "All right," I cried. "You're a greedy, cowardly old idiot, and I'll just save my money." And out I marched into the moonlight, very briskly, towards the lane. He was so quick to follow me that I had no fears of the blunderbuss, but quickened my step, and soon had him running at my heels. "Stop, stop, sir! You that hasty a poor old man." So he whimpered as he followed me like the little cur he was. "I'm hanged if I stop," I answered without looking back, and had him almost in tears before I swung round on him so suddenly that he yelped with fear. "What are you bothering me for?" I blustered. "Do you want me to wring your neck?" "Oh, I'll go, sir. I'll go," he moaned. "I've a good mind not to let you. I wouldn't if I was fit to walk 5 miles. But I'll run. Sir, I will that. I'll go as fast as ever I can, and have a conveyance at the road end of the lane as near an hour hence as you possibly can." "Why, there, sir," he cried, crassly inspired. "I could drive you in our own trap in half the time." "Oh, no, you couldn't." "I'm not fit to be out at all. It must be a closed conveyance, but I'll come to the end of the lane to save time, so let him wait there. You needn't wait yourself. Here's a sovereign of your money, and I'll leave the rest in the jug in my bedroom. There. It's worth your while to trust me, I think. As for my luggage, I'll write to Mr. Rattray about that. But I'll be shot if I spend another night on his property." I was rid of him at last, and there I stood, listening to his headlong steps, until they stumbled out of earshot down the lane, then back to the cottage. At a run myself, and up to my room to be no worse than my word. The sovereigns plopped into the water and rang together at the bottom of the jug. In another minute I was hastening through the plantation, in my hand the revolver that had served me well already, and was still loaded and capped in all 5 chambers. Chapter 14. In the garden it so happened that I met nobody at all, but I must confess that my luck was better than my management. As I came upon the beck, a new sound reached me with the swirl. It was the jingle of bit and bridle. The beat of hoofs came after, and I had barely time to fling myself flat, when 2 horsemen emerged from the plantation, riding straight towards me in the moonlight. If they continued on that course, they could not fail to see me as they passed along the opposite bank. However, to my unspeakable relief, they were scarce clear of the trees when they turned their horses' heads, rode them through the water a good 70 yards from where I lay, and so away at a canter across country towards the road. On my hands and knees I had a good look at them as they bobbed up and down under the moon, and my fears subsided in astonished curiosity, for I have already boasted of my eyesight, and I could have sworn that neither Rattray nor any one of his guests was of the horsemen. Yet the back and shoulders of one of these seemed somehow familiar to me. Not that I wasted many moments over the coincidence, for I had other things to think about as I ran on to the hall. I found the rear of the building in darkness, unrelieved from within. On the other hand, the climbing moon beat so full upon the garden wall. It was as though a lantern pinned me as I crept beneath it. In passing I thought I might as well try the gate, but Eva was right. It was locked, and that made me half inclined to distrust my eyes in the matter of the 2 horsemen. For whence could they have come, if not from the hall? In any case, I was well rid of them. I now followed the wall some little distance, and then, to see over it, walked backwards until I was all but in the beck, and there, sure enough, shone my darling's candle, it close against the diamond panes of her narrow, lofty window. It brought those ready tears back to my foolish, fevered eyes. But for sentiment there was no time, and every other emotion was either futile or premature. So I mastered my full heart, I steeled my wretched nerves, and braced my limp muscles for the task that lay before them. I had a garden wall to scale, nearly twice my own height, and without notch or cranny in the ancient, solid masonry. I stood against it on my toes, and I touched it with my finger-tips as high up as possible. Some 4 feet severed them from the coping that left only half a sky above my upturned eyes. I do not know whether I have made it plain that the house was not surrounded by 4 walls, but merely filled a breach in one of the 4, which nipped it as it were at either end. The back entrance was approachable enough, but barred or watched, I might be very sure. It is ever the vulnerable points which are most securely guarded, and it was my one comfort that the difficult way must also be the safe way, if only the difficulty could be overcome. How to overcome it was the problem. I followed the wall right round to the point at which it abutted on the tower that immured my love. The height never varied, nor could my hands or eyes discover a single foothold, ledge, or other means of mounting to the top. Yet my hot head was full of ideas, and I wasted some minutes in trying to lift from its hinges a solid, 6-barred, outlying gate that my weak arms could hardly stir. More time went in pulling branches from the oak trees about the beck, where the latter ran nearest to the moonlit wall. I had an insane dream of throwing a long-forked branch over the cupping, and so swarming up hand over hand. But even to me the impracticability of this plan came home at last, and there I stood in a breathless lather, much time and strength thrown away together, and the candle burning down for nothing in that little lofty window, and the running water swirling noisily over its stones at my back. This was the only sound. The wind had died away, the moonlit valley lay as still as the dread old house in its midst, but for the splash and gurgle of the beck. I fancied this grew louder as I paused and listened in my helplessness. All at once, was it the tongue of nature telling me the way, or common gumption returning at the 11th hour? I ran down to the water's edge, and could have shouted for joy. Great stones lay in equal profusion on bed and banks. I lifted one of the heaviest in both hands. I staggered with it to the wall. I came back for another. For some 20 minutes I was so employed, my ultimate reward a fine heap of boulders against the wall. Then I began to build, then mounted my pile, clawing the wall to keep my balance. My fingers were still many inches from the coping. I jumped down and gave another 10 minutes to the back-breaking work of carrying more boulders from the water to the wall. Then I widened my cairn below, so that I could stand firmly before springing upon the pinnacle with which I completed it. I knew well that this would collapse under me if I allowed my weight to rest more than an instant upon it. And so at last it did. But my fingers had clutched the coping in time, had grabbed it even as the insecure pyramid crumbled, and left me dangling. Instantly exerting what muscle I had left, and the occasion gave me, I succeeded in pulling myself up until my chins was on a level with my hands, when I flung an arm over and caught the inner coping. The other arm followed, then a leg, and at last I sat astride the wall, panting and palpitating, and hardly able to credit my own achievement. One great difficulty had been my huge revolver. I had been terribly frightened it might go off, and had finally used my cravat to sling it at the back of my neck. It had shifted a little, and I was working it round again, preparatory to my drop, when I saw the light suddenly taken from the window in the tower, and a kerchief waving for one instant in its place. So she had been waiting and watching for me all these hours. I dropped into the garden in a very ecstasy of grief and rapture. To think that I had been so long in coming to my love, but that I had come at last. And I picked myself up in a very frenzy of fear lest, after all, I should fail to spirit her from this horrible place. Doubly desolate it looked in the rays of that bright October moon. Skulking in the shadow of the wall which had so long baffled me, I looked across a sharp border of shade upon a chaos, the more striking for its lingering trim design. The long, straight paths were barnacled with weeds, the dense, fine hedges, once prim and angular, had fattened out of all shape or form, and on the velvet sward of other days you might have waded waist-high in rotten hay. Towards the garden end this rank jungle merged into a worse wilderness of rhododendrons, the tallest I have ever seen. On all this the white moon smiled, and the grim house glowered, to the eternal swirl and rattle of the beck beyond its walls. Long enough I stood where I had dropped, listening with all my being for some other sound, but at last that great studded door creaked and shivered on its ancient hinges, and I heard voices arguing in the Portuguese tongue. It was poor Eva wheedling that black rascal Jose. I saw her in the lighted porch, the nigger I saw also, shrugging and gesticulating for all the world like his hateful master, yet giving in, I felt certain, though I could not understand a word that reached me. And indeed my little mistress very soon sailed calmly out, followed by final warnings and expostulations hurled from the step. For the black stood watching her as she came steadily my way, now raising her head to sniff the air, now stooping to pluck up a weed, the very picture of a prisoner seeking the open air for its own sake solely. I had a keen eye apiece for them as I cowered closer to the wall, revolver in hand. But ere my love was very near me, for she would stand long moments gazing ever so innocently at the moon, her jailer had held a bottle to the light, and had beaten a retreat so sudden and so hasty that I expected him back every moment, and so durst not stir. Eva saw me, however, and contrived to tell me so without interrupting the air that she was humming as she walked. "Follow me," she sang. "Only keep as you are, close to the wall, close to the wall." And on she strolled to her own tune, and came abreast of me without turning her head, so I crept in the shadow, and my ugly weapon tucked out of sight, and she sauntered in the shine, until we came to the end of the garden, where the path turned at right angles, running behind the rhododendrons. Once in their shelter, she halted and beckoned me, and next instant I had her hands in mine. "At last," was all that I could say for many a moment, as I stood there gazing into her dear eyes, no hero in my heroic hour, but the bigger love-sick fool than ever. "But quick, quick," I added, as she brought me to my senses by withdrawing her hands. "We've no time to lose." And I looked wildly from wall to wall, only to find them as barren and inaccessible on this side as on the other. "We have more time than you think," were Eva's first words. "We can do nothing for half an hour, but—" "Why not?" "I'll tell you in a minute." "How did you manage to get over?" "Brought boulders from the beck, and piled them up till I could reach the top." I thought her eyes glistened. "What patience!" she cried softly. "We must find a simpler way of getting out, and I think I have. They've all gone, you know. But Josie—" "All three. The captain has been gone all day. Then the other two must have been my horsemen, very probably in some disguise. And my head swam with the thought of the risk that I had run at the very moment when I thought myself safest. Well, I would have finished them both. But I did not say so to Eva. I did not mention the incident. I was so fearful of destroying her confidence in me. Apologizing, therefore, for my interruption, without explaining it, I begged her to let me hear her plan. It was simple enough. There was no fear of the others returning before midnight. The chances were that they would be very much later, and now it was barely 11, and Eva had promised not to stay out above half an hour. When it was up, Josie would come and call her. "It is horrid to have to be so cunning," cried little Eva with an angry shudder. but it's no use thinking of that. She was quick enough to add, "When you have such dreadful men to deal with, such fiends. And I have had all day to prepare, and have suffered till I am so desperate I would rather die tonight than spend another in that house." "No, let me finish." "Josie will come round here to look for me, but you and I will be hiding on the other side of these rhododendrons, and when we hear him here we'll make a dash for it across the long grass. Once let us get the door shut and locked in his face, and he'll be in a trap. It will take him some time to break in, time enough to give us a start. What's more, when he finds us gone, he'll do what they all used to do in any doubt." "What's that?" "Say nothing till it's found out, then lie for their lives," and it was their lives, poor creatures on the Zambesi. She was silent a moment, her determined little face hard, set upon some unforgotten horror. "Once we get away, I shall be surprised if it's found out till morning," concluded Eva, without a word as to what I was to do with her. Neither, indeed, had I myself given that question a moment's consideration. "Then let's make a dash for it now," was all I said or thought. "No, they can't come yet, and Josie is strong and brutal, and I have heard how ill you are, that you should have come to me notwithstanding." And she broke off with her little hands lying so gratefully on my shoulders that I know not how I refrained from catching her then and there to my heart. Instead, I laughed and said that my illness was a pure and deliberate sharp, and my presence there its direct result. And such was the virtue in my beloved's voice, the magic of her eyes, the healing of her touch, that I was scarce conscious of deceit, but felt a whole man once more as we two stood together in the moonlight. In a trance I stood there gazing into her brave young eyes. In a trance I suffered her to lead me by the hand through the rank, dense rhododendrons. And still entranced I crouched by her side, near the further side, with only unkempt grass plot and a weedy path between us and that ponderous door, wide open still, and replaced by a section of the lighted hail within. On this we fixed our attention with mingled dread and impatience, those contending elements of suspense. But the black was slow to reappear, and my eyes stole home to my sweet girl's face, with its glory of moonlit curls, and the eager, resolute, embittered look that put the world back 2 whole months, and Eva Denison upon the Lady Jermyn's poop in the ship's last hours. But it was not her look alone. She had on her cloak, as the night before, but with me a God bless her. She found no need to clasp herself in its folds, and underneath she wore the very dress in which she had sung at our last concert and been rescued in the gig. It looked as though she had worn it ever since. The roses were crushed and soiled, the tulle all torn, and tarnished some strings of beads that had been gold, a tatter of Chantilly lace hung by a thread. It is another of the relics that I have unearthed in the writing of this narrative. I thought men never noticed dresses. My love said suddenly, a pleased light in her eyes, I thought, in spite of all. "Do you really remember it?" "I remember every one of them," I said indignantly, and so I did. "You will wonder why I wear it," said Eva, quickly. "It was the first that came that terrible night. They have given me many since. But I won't wear one of them. Not one! How her eyes flashed! I forgot all about Josie. I suppose you know why they hadn't room for you in the gig," she went on. "No, I don't know, and I don't care. They had room for you," said I. "That's all I care about. And to think she could not see I loved her. But do you mean to say you don't know that these murderers set fire to the ship?" "No." "Yes." "I heard you say so last night. And you don't want to know what for." Out of politeness I protested that I did, but, as I live, all I wanted to know just then was whether my love loved me, whether she ever could, whether such happiness was possible under heaven. "You remember all that mystery about the cargo?" she continued eagerly, her pretty lips so divinely parted. "It turned out to be gunpowder," said I, still thinking only of her. "No gold. But it was gunpowder," I insisted, for it was my incorrigible passion for accuracy which had led up to half our arguments on the voyage. But this time Eva let me off. It was also gold 12,000 ounces from the diggings. That was the real mystery. Do you mean to say you never guessed? No, by Jove, I didn't, said I. She had diverted my interest at last. I asked her if she had known on board. Not until the last moment. I found out during the fire. Do you remember when we said goodbye? I was nearly telling you then. Did I remember? The very letter of that last interview was cut deep in my heart. Not a sleepless night had I passed without rehearsing it word for word and look for look, and sometimes, when sorrow had spent itself, and the heart could bleed no more, vain grief had given place to vainer speculation, and I had cudgelled my wakeful brains for the meaning of the new and subtle horror which I had read in my darling's eyes at the last. Now I understood, and the one explanation brought such a tribe in its train, that even the perilous ecstasy of the present moment was temporarily forgotten in the horrible past. Now I know why they wouldn't have me in the gig. I cried softly. She carried 4 heavy men's weight in gold. One on earth did they get it aboard. In provision boxes at the last, but they had been filling the boxes for weeks. Why? I saw them doing it. I cried. But what about the gig? Who picked you up? She was watching that open door once more, and she answered with notable indifference, Mr. Rattray. So that's the connection, said I, and I think its very simplicity was what surprised me most. Yes, he was waiting for us at Ascension. Then it was all arranged. Every detail. And this young blackguard is as bad as any of them? Worse, said she, with bitter brevity. Nor had I ever seen her look so hard but once, and that was the night before in the old Justice Hall, when she told Rattray her opinion of him to his face. She had now the same angry flush, the same set mouth and scornful voice, and I took it finally into my head that she was unjust to the poor devil, villain though he was. With all his villainy I declined to believe him as bad as the others. I told her so in as many words, and in a moment we were arguing as though we were back on the Lady Jermyn, with nothing else to do. You may admire wholesale murderers and thieves, said Eva. I do not. Nor I. My point is simply that this not as bad as the rest. I believe he was really glad for my sake when he discovered that I knew nothing of the villainy. Come now, has he ever offered you any personal violence? Me? Mr. Rattray, I should hope not, indeed. Has he never saved you from any? I don't know. Sen I do. When you left them last night, there was some talk of bringing you back by force. You can guess who suggested that, and who set his face against it and got his way. You would think the better of Rattray had you heard what passed. Should I? She asked half eagerly, as she looked quickly round at me, and suddenly I saw her eyes fill. Oh, why will you speak about him? She burst out. Why must you defend him, unless it's to go against me, as you always did and always will? I never knew anybody like you. Never. I want you to take me away from these wretches, and all you do is to defend them. Not all, said I, clasping her hand warmly in mine. Not all. Not all. I will take you away from them, never fear. In another hour, grant you, may be out of their reach forever. But where are we to go? She whispered wildly. What are you to do with me? All my friends think me dead, and if they knew I was not, it would all come out. So it shall, said I. The sooner the better. If I'd had my way, it would all be out already. I see her yet, my passionate darling, as she turned upon me, wetter than the full white moon. Mr. Cole, said she, you must give me your sacred promise that so far as you are concerned, it shall never come out at all. This monstrous conspiracy, this cold-blooded massacre, and I crouched aghast. Wes, it could do no good, and at any rate, unless you promise I remain where I am, in their hands, decidedly, to warn them in time. Leave them I would, but betray them, never. What could I say? What choice had I in the face of an alternative so headstrong and so unreasonable? To rescue Eva from these miscreants, I would let every malefactor in the country go unscathed, yet the condition was a hard one, and as I hesitated, my love went on her knees to me, there in the moonlight among the rhododendrons. "Promise, promise, or you will kill me," she gasped. "They may deserve it richly, but I would rather be torn in little pieces than have them hanged. It is too good for most of them. Promise to hold my tongue about them all." "Wes." "Promise 100 lives were sacrificed. Promise." "I can't," I said. "It's run goodbye," she cried, starting to her feet. "No, no," and I caught her hand. "Well then, why, promise." Chapter 15. First blood. So I bound myself to a guilty secrecy for Eva's sake, to save her from these wretches, or, if you will, to win her for myself. Nor did it strike me as very strange, after a moment's reflection, that she should intercede thus earnestly for a band headed by her own mother's widower, prime scoundrel of them all though she knew him to be. The only surprise was that she had not interceded in his name, that I should have forgotten, and she should have allowed me to forget, the very existence of so indisputable a claim upon her loyalty. This, however, made it a little difficult to understand the hysterical gratitude with which my unwilling promise was received. Poor darling, she was beside herself with sheer relief. She wept as I had never seen her weep before. She seized and even kissed my hands, as one who neither knew nor cared what she did, surprising me so much by her emotion that this expression of it passed unheeded. I was the best friend she had ever had. I was her one good friend in all the world. She would trust herself to me, and if I would but take her to the convent where she had been brought up, she would pray for me there until her death. But that would not be very long, all of which confused me utterly. It seemed an inexplicable breakdown in one who had shown such nerve and courage hitherto, and so hearty a loathing for that damnable Santos. So completely had her presence of mind forsaken her that she looked no longer where she had been gazing hitherto. And thus it was that neither of us saw Josie until we heard him calling, "Senhora Eva, Senhora Eva," with some rapid sentences in Portuguese. "Now is our time," I whispered, crouching lower and clasping a small hand gone suddenly cold. "Think of nothing now but getting out of this. I'll keep my word once we are out, and here's the toy that's going to get us out." And I produced my Dean and Adams with no small relish. A little trustful pressure was my answer and my reward. Meanwhile the black was singing out lustily in evident suspicion and alarm. "He says they are coming back," whispered Eva. "But that's impossible." "Why?" "Because if they were he couldn't see them, and if he heard them he would be frightened of their hearing him. But here he comes." A shuffling, quick step on the path, a running grumble of unmistakable threats, a shambling, moonlit figure seen, in glimpses through the leaves, very near us for an instant, then hidden by the shrubbery, as he passed within a few yards of our hiding-place. A diminuendo of the shuffling steps, then a cursing, frightened savage at one end of the rhododendrons, and we two stealing out at the other, hand in hand, and bent quite double into the long neglected grass. "Can you run for it?" I was yes, but not too fast, for fear we trip. "Come on, then." The lighted open doorway grew greater at every stride. He hasn't seen us yet. No. I hear him threatening me still. No, he has, though. A wild whoop proclaimed the fact, and upright we tore at top speed through the last 10 yards of grass, while the black rushed down one of the side paths, gaining audibly on us over the better ground. But our start had saved us, and we flew up the stairs. His feet ceased to clatter on the path. He had plunged into the grass to cut off the corner. "Thank God!" cried Eva. "Now shut it quick." The great door swung home with a mighty clatter, and Eva seized the key in both hands. "I can't turn it." To lose a second was to take a life, and unconsciously I was sticking at that. perhaps from no higher instinct than distrust of my aim. Our pursuer, however, was on the steps when I clapped my free hand on top of those little white straining ones, and by a timely effort bent both them and the key round together. The ward shot home as Josie hurled himself against the door. Eva bolted it. But the thud was not repeated, and I gathered myself together between the door and the nearest window, for by now I saw there was but one thing for us. The nigger must be disabled, if I could manage such a nicety. If not, the devil take his own. Well, I was not one tick too soon for him. My pistol was not cocked before the crash came that I was counting on, and with it a shower of small glass driving across the 6-foot sill and tinkling on the flags. Next came a black and bloody face, at which I could not fire. I had to wait till I saw his legs, when I promptly shattered one of them at disgracefully short range. The report was as deafening as one upon the stage. The hall filled with white smoke, and remained hideous with the bellowing of my victim. I searched him without a qualm, but threats of annihilation instead, and found him unarmed but for that very knife which Rattray had induced me to hand over to him in town. I had a grim satisfaction in depriving him of this, and but small compunction in turning my back upon his pain. "Come," I said to poor Eva, "don't pity him, though I dare say he's the most pitiable of the lot. Show me the way through, and I'll follow with this lamp." One was burning on the old oak table. I carried it along a narrow passage, through a great low kitchen, where I bumped my head against the black oak beams, and I held it on high at a door almost as massive as the one which we had succeeded in shutting in the nigger's face. "I was afraid of it," cried Eva, with a sudden sob. "What is it?" "They've taken away the key." Yes, the keen air came through an empty keyhole, and my lamp, held close, not only showed that the door was locked, but that the lock was one with which an unskilled hand might tamper for hours without result. I dealt it a hearty kick by way of a test. The heavy timber did not budge. There was no play at all at either lock or hinges, nor did I see how I could spend one of my 4 remaining bullets upon the former, with any chance of a return. Then it must be a window. All the back ones are bad. Securely? Yes. Then we've no choice in the matter, and I led the way back to the hall, where the poor black devil lay blubbering in his blood. In the kitchen I found the bottle of wine, a Rattray's best port, that they were trying to make her take for her health, with which Eva had bribed him, and I gave it to him before laying hands on a couple of chairs. "What are you going to do?" "Go out the way we came." "But the wall." "Pile up these chairs, and as many more as we may need, if we can't open the gate." But Eva was not paying attention any longer, either to me or to Josie. His white teeth were showing in a grin for all his pain. Her eyes were fixed in horror on the floor. "They've come back," she gasped. The underground passage. Hark, hark. There was a muffled rush of feet beneath our own, then a dull but very distinguishable clatter on some invisible stair. "Underground passage," I exclaimed, and in my sheer disgust I forgot what was due to my darling. "Why on earth didn't you tell me of it before?" "There was so much to tell you. It leads to the sea." "Oh, what shall we do? Upstairs?" "Anywhere," cried Eva, wildly. "Leave them to me, leave them to me." "I like that," said I, and I did, but I detested myself for the tears my words had drawn, and I prepared to die for them. "They'll kill you, Mr. Cole." "Cute would serve me right, but we'll see about it." And I stood with my revolver very ready in my right hand, while with the other I caught poor Eva to my side, even as a door flew open, and Rattray himself burst upon us, a lantern in his hand, and the perspiration shining on his handsome face in its light. I can see him now as he stood dumbfounded on the threshold of the hall, and yet, at the time, my eyes sped past him into the room beyond. It was the one I have described as being lined with books. There was a long rent in this lining, where the books had opened with a door, through which Captain Harris, Joaquin Santos, and Jane Braithwaite followed Rattray in quick succession, the men all with lanterns. The woman scarlet and dishevelled even for her. It was over the squire's shoulders I saw their faces. He kept them from passing him in the doorway by a free use of his elbows, and when I looked at him again, his black eyes were blazing from a face white with passion, and they were fixed upon me. "What the devil brings you here?" he thundered at last. "Don't ask idle questions," was my reply to that. "So you were shamming today?" "I was taking a leaf out of your book." "You'll gain nothing by being clever," sneered the squire, taking a threatening step forward. For at the last moment I had tucked my revolver behind my back, not only for the pleasure, but for the obvious advantage of getting them all in front of me and off their guard. I had no idea that such eyes as Rattray's could be so fiercer. They were dancing from me to my companion, whom their glitter frightened into an attempt to disengage herself from me, but my arm only tightened about her drooping figure. "I shall gain no more than I expect," said I, carelessly. "And I know what to expect from brave gentlemen like you. It will be better than your own fate. At all events, anything's better than being taken hence to the place of execution, and hanged by the neck until you are dead, all three of you in a row, and your bodies buried within the precincts of the prison." "The very thing for him," murmured Santos. "The very thing. But I'm so soft-hearted," I went insanely on, "that I should be sorry to see that happen to such fine fellows as you are. Come out of that, you little fraud behind there." It was my betrayer skulking in the room. "Come out and line up with the rest." "No, I'm not going to see you fellows dance on nothing. I've another kind of ball apiece for you, and one between them for the Braithwaites. Well, I suppose I always had a nasty tongue in me, and rather enjoyed making play with it on provocation. But if so, I met with my deserts that night, for the nigger of the Lady Jermyn lay all but hid behind Eva and me. If they saw him at all, they may have thought him drunk, but as for myself, I had fairly forgotten his existence until the very moment came for showing my revolver, when it was twisted out of my grasp instead, and a ball sang under my arm as the brute fell back exhausted, and the weapon clattered beside him. Before I could stoop for it there was a dead weight on my left arm, and Squire Rattray was over the table at a bound, with his arms jostling mine beneath Eva Denison's senseless form. "Leave her to me," he cried fiercely. "You fool," he added in a lower key. "Do you think I'd let any harm come to her?" I looked him in the bright and honest eyes that had made me trust him in the beginning, and I did not utterly distrust him yet. Rather was the guile on my side as I drew back and watched Rattray lift the young girl tenderly and slowly carry her to the door by which she had entered and left the hall just 24 hours before. I could not take my eyes off them till they were gone, and when I looked for my revolver, it also had disappeared. Josie had not got it. He lay insensible. Santos was whispering to Harris. Neither of them seemed armed. I made sure that Rattray had picked it up and carried it off with Eva. I looked wildly for some other weapon. 2 unarmed men and a woman were all I had to deal with, for Braithwaite had long since vanished. Could I but knock the worthless life out of the men, I should have but the squire and his servants to deal with, and in that quarter I still had my hopes of a bloodless battle and a treaty of war. A log fire was smouldering in the open grate. I darted to it, and had a heavy, half-burned brand whirling round my head next instant. Harris was the first within my reach. He came gamely at me with his fists. I sprang upon him, and struck him to the ground with one blow, the sparks flying far and wide as my smoking brand met the seaman's skull. Santos was upon me next instant, and him, by sheer luck, I managed to serve the same. But I doubt whether either man was stunned, and I was standing ready for them to rise, when I felt myself seized round the neck from behind, and a mass of fluffy hair tickling my cheek, while a shrill voice set up a lusty scream for the squire. I have said that the woman Braithwaite was of a sinister strength, but I had little dreamt how strong she really was. First it was her arms that wound themselves about my neck, long, sinuous, and supple as the tentacles of some vile monster. Then, as I struggled, her thumbs were on my windpipe like pads of steel. Tighter she pressed, and tighter yet. My eyeballs started, my tongue lolled, I heard my brand drop, and through a mist I saw it picked up instantly. It crashed upon my skull as I still struggled vainly. Again and again it came down mercilessly in the same place, until I felt as though a sponge of warm water had been squeezed over my head, and saw 100 withered masks, grinning sudden exultation into mine. But still the lean arm whirled, and the splinters flew, till I was blind with my blood, and the 7 senses were beaten out of me.